Hello friends, welcome back. Today I'm gonna recap the movie named The 100-Foot Journey. Was released in 2014. The story begins with the Muslim Konkani Kadam family runs a restaurant in Mumbai. As a child, the second oldest son, Hassan, would shop with his mother at the market, where he was adept at picking the highest quality food. Now a young man, he is in training to replace her mother as the restaurant's main cook. But one night, when a mob attacks and burns down the restaurant, after a disputed election, his mother dies in the fire. Seeking asylum in Europe, the Kadams first settled in London, but they dislike the climate in their house, which is right next to Heathrow, so they depart from mainland Europe, near St. Antonin in the Midi-Pyrenees in France. The brakes on the Kadams' van fail, causing panic in all the passengers, but fortunately, near the descent, there was a rescue lane, so they avoided an accident. Marguerite, a local woman, passes by and helps tow the van to town. She invites the family into her apartment, while they deal with the auto repair shop and arrange lodgings for the night, and she treats them to a tray of delicious food she made using fresh, local ingredients. The next morning, Hassan follows his father to an abandoned property they passed the night before. A restaurant had been there, but it failed because La Salle Pleureurs's The Weeping Willow, an upscale French restaurant with a Michelin star, is located just across the street, 100 feet away. He is interested in buying the restaurant, even though Hassan warned him to first discuss it with Mansur, the eldest son. But the stubborn Papa Kadam did not heed Hassan's warning, because after all, he was going to buy the restaurant with his money, not Mansur. Then they entered the restaurant building and walked around inside. Suddenly an old woman appeared asking them to leave the building, as they had trespassed. Mr. Kadam expressed his intention to buy the building, but the old woman said that she did not own it. Her expression reflected her distaste for Mr. Hassan and Kadam. Seeing this, Hassan asked his father to leave the place, but his father refused. The next day, Mr. Kadam got a call from the sales agent, and the owner agrees to sell him the building. Finally, the restaurant was bought by them, naming their restaurant Mason Mumbai. The Kadam family renovates the property. One day when Hassan went to the market, he accidentally met Marguerite and asked a few things about French cuisine, as well as the Michelin star. The Michelin star is a star award, and also a classification for restaurants in France. All restaurants chase the star's pride and recognition for their restaurant. One day, Mrs. Mallory, the proprietor of Salle Pleureur, visits and asks to see their menu. Mr. Kadam hesitates, but Hassan gladly gives it to her, in case she wishes to dine with them sometime. The day before the opening of Mason Mumbai, Mr. Kadam is promoting his restaurant with confidence in various places with a special 50% discount on a premiere night. The next morning, when Hassan and Mr. Kadam went shopping at the market, it turned out that the main ingredients for their menu had sold out. It turned out that all the ingredients had been bought by Mrs. Mallory, with the aim of destroying the opening of Mr. Kadam's restaurant. Knowing this, Mr. Kadam was furious and declared war on Mrs. Mallory. Kadam and Hassan finally went to another market and bought alternative ingredients for their cooking. The first opening of the restaurant started by presenting an Indian atmosphere, but after hours Mr. Kadam waited, none of the customers came. Mr. Kadam then changed his clothes to typical Indian clothes, including sending his daughter to welcome customers. Unexpectedly, it turns out that this method has succeeded in attracting customers to come to the restaurant. The visitors to Mr. Kadam's restaurant are getting busier day by day, and this worries Mrs. Mallory, because now her restaurant is starting to be competitive. Mrs. Mallory reported Mr. Kadam's restaurant to the mayor on charges of causing noise, because Mr. Kadam's restaurant was playing loud music. One day Hassan accidentally met Marguerite while fishing. Hassan took the opportunity to ask Marguerite, who is a sous chef at Salle Pleureur, to help him learn about French cooking. Marguerite explains that to master French cooking one must master 5 recipes for sauce ingredients, which are bechamel, velout, hollandaise, tomato and espagnole. That night Hassan immediately learned to make the 5 sauces from a recipe book. The next morning Hassan takes Marguerite for a picnic in a park. There Hassan asked her to taste the 5 sauces he had made, as well as the smoked meat he had brought with him. When she tried it, she was impressed by Hassan's cooking. According to her, Hassan has the potential to become a chef. Since childhood, Hassan did have a stronger sense of taste than his other siblings. And besides cooking, his mother also taught Hassan to taste various dishes and explore the philosophy of cooking. Now they develop feelings for each other. Not long after, the mayor came to Mr. Kadam's restaurant to mediate the report from Mrs. Mallory. Mr. Kadam agrees with the mayor's suggestion, but he will not stop the drums of war on Mrs. Mallory. One day Mrs. Mallory's restaurant will have a minister and will entertain her guests with a special menu of pigeons and truffle sauce. But when Mrs. Mallory was shopping at the market, the pigeons had been bought out by someone. As it turned out, it was a counterattack from Mr. Cottam. Knowing this, Hassan, who did not like his father's behavior, came to Mrs. Mallory's restaurant with a pigeon dish complete with truffle sauce. Not to forget, he also apologized for his father's behavior. Then Mrs. Mallory tasted Hassan's cooking, but the food was immediately thrown in the trash. Behind the restaurant, Mrs. Mallory thought, because she had lied about what she had tasted, it turned out to be very delicious. Since then, the trade war between the two restaurants has been getting fiercer. The war between the restaurant peaks on Bastille Day, when one of Mallory's chefs, Jean-Pierre, and two others spray paint La France aux Francaise, France to the French on the outer wall of Maison Mumbai, and firebomb the covered outdoor eating area. Hassan catches them in the act and scares them off, but his hands get burned, makes Mallory sympathetic and suspicious of one of his men named Jean. Because of his act, Mrs. Mallory dismisses him and personally scrubs the graffiti off the wall. While she is cleaning, Hassan offers to make her an omelette, which is how Marguerite said Mrs. Mallory interviews potential chefs. As his hands are bandaged, Hassan instructs Mrs. Mallory how to make the omelette his way, which uses unusual spices and ingredients. Mrs. Mallory was in tears, for it was the first time she had such a delicious omelette, and she was also finally honest that Hassan's truffle sauce pigeon the other day was delicious. She invites him to work at Salle Pleureur so he can get more classical training to supplement his natural ability. Abu is initially against the move but ultimately allows Hassan to go. Marguerite accuses Hassan of using her to help him get his new position, and they compete for Mallory's approval in the kitchen. Since then, the relationship between Mr. Cottam and Mrs. Mallory began to improve. Hassan cooks various dishes and makes new innovations in Salle Pleureur cuisine, until one day the restaurant returned to the minister. Hassan was trusted to prepare a menu of pigeons with truffle sauce. Unexpectedly in the group, there was a food critic, as well as an agent from Michelin. A few days later, Mrs. Mallory received a call from the Michelin side informing them that the restaurant was awarded the Michelin star for the second time. To everyone's delight, the restaurant had waited 30 years to get its second star. The award gets him national attention, and he accepts a job at a fancy Parisian molecular cuisine restaurant. In Paris, he continued to make culinary innovations, which made him frequent in magazines and television. On the other hand, Mr. Cottam and Mrs. Mallory begin seeing each other. Hassan's style quickly draws attention, and there is speculation that he may bring his new restaurant a third Michelin star. Over time, however, he becomes increasingly lonely and distracted by thoughts of his family and Marguerite. So one day he returns to St. Antonin. He tells Marguerite he has a business proposition for her and asks her to help him cook a dish he has not made for a long time. They prepare it in the kitchen at Salle Pleureur, and when the Cattams and some friends arrive for dinner, everyone is surprised to see Hassan. Mallory announces she is giving him control of Salle Pleureur, and he says he is moving back to the village to run the restaurant with Marguerite. Hassan does not answer the call. That will reveal whether the restaurant in Paris received a third Michelin star, saying he will earn a third star with his friends and family. The group carries their meal across the road to eat at Maison Mumbai. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.